Hello and welcome to my tutorial on utilizing the cURL library with PHP to help in the submission of form data. Now, if you've done any sort of PHP development, you've probably had to come across some sort of job where you've had to process form data. Now, as you can see, I've set up a very basic form. What this form does is it's going to collect very basic information, and when submitted, it's going to transmit the data via the post method. It's going to transmit that data to a script called someaction.php. Now, for demo purposes, I only really need to fill out information for the first two fields. Because what I'm going to do is submit the form, and as you can see, I'm echoing out the first name and last name. Now, if you look at the code I have set up, the very first thing you'll notice is I have my form. Very basic, and again, it's submitting the data via the post method to someaction.php. Now, if you look at someaction.php, I have created variables and basically assigned the values from the post array to those variables. Now, again, the only thing I'm doing is echoing out the first name and last name. I could do something more complex, such as send an email, or I could process the information into a database. But for today's purposes, what we're really wanting to get to is the cURL process of submitting that form for me. Now, in my example, that's a very simple form. Most web browsers will automatically fill out that data for me if I have any saved session information. But the purposes of cURL is to really get in there and help submit data very quickly, something you can set up with a cron job, or as you get into complex forms, it can really start to save you time. So the first thing you want to do is, if you're working on a local host or whatever environment you're working in, you'll want to make sure that in your php.ini file you have cURL enabled, which simply means just commenting out the cURL library, or uncommenting out the cURL library. With that done, you can actually begin creating the script that's going to utilize cURL to help in the form submission. Now, the first thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to create an array. This is going to hold all of the data for the post values as well as the field names. So again, for demo purposes, I'm going to keep it simple and just assign inside that array first name and last name. Now, you can submit this for any field that you need. You basically just create an array, you give it the post field name, and then you assign it the value that you would be submitting through the form. With all of that done, what you're going to want to do is, when data is submitted via the post method, it's being sent as one long string, just a single string with the post field name followed by the value. So we're going to mimic that inside of our PHP script simply by creating a post string variable. Now, to begin, we're going to start that as just a blank value so that we can actually process this information properly. Now, to do so, we're going to need to echo out the field and the value that we have set up in our data array. To do so, we're going to need to set up a for each loop. And we're going to want to pass it the value of data, and we're going to want to process it as key and value. Now, once we've got that set up, we can actually begin to concatenate our string to have the field and the value submit as one variable. Again, in this case, it's going to be our post string variable. And we're going to do so simply by assigning it the value of the key, concatenating it with the equal sign to assign the key now the value. And for cleanup purposes, I'm going to at least do a URL encode to make sure that that value is getting submitted properly. Oops. And now, in theory, we've gone through and we've assigned it the very first name and the value to first name. So we're going to want to also include the ampersand symbol so that we can move on to the next value in our array and still keep this as one string. So now what's going to happen is our for each loop is going to go through our data array and assign it the value and the field. And it's going to submit that all as one data set. Now, we've gone through the for each loop, but the one thing you're going to notice is we've got that ampersand still at the very end. So when we submit this data via cURL, it's going to be looking for one more set of fields and values. We don't want that. So I'm going to simply process my post string, and I'm going to use PHP's substring function to clean the value up, basically. I'm going to remove that very last ampersand. And if you've never used this function before, all I'm doing is substring is going to start at the very first character in the substring, and it's going to remove the very last character. That's what the -1 is representing. If you need to see this in action, echo out the post string before you do this and echo it out afterwards. You'll simply notice that it's removing the ampersand from the very last bit of our value. Now, with that done, we have data that is ready to be submitted to our processor. So now we're going to actually use cURL. I'm going to create a new cURL session by using the cURL init function. And all this does is it's basically going to open up a new cURL session for us. With a session set up, the next thing I can do is start to set all my cURL options. The first one I'm going to set up is simply the method, the action of the form. So I'm going to utilize my instance, my object, and I'm going to assign that the value of curl opt URL. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow me to define where the form is being submitted to. In this case, localhost /demo/someaction.php. Now, curl now knows where this form is being submitted to, and where, when it runs, it's going to submit data to. Now, the next thing I need to do is tell curl how this information is being submitted. In this case, it is being submitted via the post method. So I'm going to assign the curl option of post to true. Now the next thing I'm going to want to do is let it know what fields we're processing. So I'm going to simply set up another option, and this one is going to be called curl opt post fields. And this will know now that we're going to submit data to the post fields using the variable that we set up, post string. Now the very next thing we're going to want to do is return the transfer. So another curl set option. And we're going to set the return transfer to true. Now we're ready to actually execute this curl process. That's a very simple command. And I'm going to actually create a variable to kind of handle this. So if you need to determine whether it was successful or not, you have a variable set to this. But the curl execute function is going to execute our curl script. And with that, response is now the executed curl command. We have now used curl to submit data to localhost demo someaction.php. Now we could leave it at that, but for better programming, I'm going to simply close my curl connection so it's not just sitting there. And with that, if you were to run your form, you will have that form field actually submitted. And since our form isn't actually doing anything on the processing side, we get a blank white screen. You could use this and set up a check to determine if the execution was successful or not, echo out a response. And had we have had something like a database connection on the form processor or an email sent out, we would have gotten that information. But in a nutshell, that's a very basic way to submit data via cURL. Now I'm going to post this code on my website. Feel free to browse it, look at it. But if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me, and I hope you found this tutorial to be very useful. Thank you.